Sometimes, when the night swallows the American highways and the only sound you hear is the deep rumble of the engine, you start noticing things that shouldn't be there. I've spent decades listening to truckers' stories, men and women who cross the country hauling loads you'll never know about. Many have told me things they swore they'd never repeat, but some of those stories still haunt me to this day. I'm going to share 4 of them with you. Real stories, told by veteran drivers. Stories that happened in the suffocating heat of the Arizona desert, in the thick fog of a forgotten road in New Mexico, in the merciless ice of Alaska, and in the shadowy forests leading to Canada. If you think the road is dangerous because of thieves or accidents, wait until you hear what lurks on the asphalt, in the shadows, and sometimes inside your own truck. And a word of advice. If you're ever driving alone at night and notice something strange in the rearview mirror, don't slow down, don't look twice. The road has eyes, and sometimes it looks back. Now, before this journey begins, I need you to do one thing. Hit the subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone brave enough to listen until the end. Because after today, you'll never see the road the same way again. Take a deep breath, fasten your seatbelt. The first story begins in the middle of the Arizona desert, where the heat can kill you. But on that night, it was the cold that was lurking. I had crossed that stretch of I-8 dozens of times before, but that night, everything felt different. It was just after 2:30 a.m., that hour when even the wind seems to be asleep. The desert around me stretched out like a black, silent ocean, broken only by the distant silhouettes of saguaros, those giant cacti with twisted arms, standing like petrified sentinels along some forgotten road. The asphalt was cracked, scarred by the brutal Arizona heat. With each passing mile, the paint on the lane dividers faded away, as if the road itself were being swallowed by time. The moon didn't show that night. There weren't enough stars to break the darkness. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel of light ahead of me, and outside of that there was only nothing. A nothing so deep it seemed to move, undulating like a living thing. Inside the cab, the air was hot and dry. The vents pushed out warm bursts that offered no relief. The dashboard glowed in shades of amber and red, and the engine rumbled in a deep, constant tone, almost hypnotic. The road felt endless, and the weight of the load behind me made the truck drag along like a tired animal. I knew this silence well, but that night, it had weight. It was a thick silence that wouldn't let my thoughts breathe, and in the middle of it, I began to notice sounds. Not clear sounds, not music, not wind, not another vehicle. It was lower, deeper, a kind of irregular vibration, like someone tapping the metal panels with the tips of their fingers. Light taps and repeated. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the suspension creaking, or the impact of small rocks flung up by the tires. But the more I tried not to hear it, the closer it seemed to get. My eyes stayed fixed on the road, but every so often, I felt an almost physical need to glance at the rear-view mirror. There was nothing there, only the strip of asphalt disappearing into the absolute blackness. Still, there was a feeling I couldn't shake, something hard to put into words. It wasn't coming from my eyes, it was coming from my skin. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you, even when you couldn't see them? That's what it was. As if a pair of eyes were pressed against my back, following every movement of my hands on the wheel. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 2:47. And for a moment, the needle on the speedometer shivered. The engine didn't stall, I didn't slow down, but the needle trembled, as if the truck had passed over some invisible pothole in time. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the strange pressure in my chest, but the desert wouldn't leave me alone. And even with the radio off, I began to hear something, a very low, muffled murmur, as if someone were whispering through the hot air inside the cab. I leaned forward, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It wasn't the engine, it wasn't the tires, it was from inside. That was the first time, that night, I felt the urge to pull the truck over, but I didn't. And looking back now, maybe that was my first mistake. The road ahead was nothing but a black ribbon, swallowed by the desert night. I had settled into that hypnotic rhythm truckers know too well. Engine growl, tire hum, the faint rattle of loose tools in the compartment behind me. That's when something flickered in my mirror, 2 pinpricks of light far behind me. At first I barely noticed them, probably another trucker, maybe a late-night hauler like me. But something was wrong. Those lights didn't move. Normally, when a vehicle appears behind you out here, it creeps closer with every mile, eventually passing with a wave or a flash of headlights. Not this time. These lights stayed exactly where they were, small sharp points in the black, perfectly aligned, never shifting. I frowned, glancing at my speedometer. 70 miles an hour. I pressed the pedal a little harder. The speed climbed to 75. The engine strained and the desert wind roared louder. The lighting stayed the same distance away. A bead of sweat rolled down my neck. It wasn't from the heat anymore. I eased off the gas, letting the truck slow to 60. The lights didn't get closer, didn't fade. They just hovered there. It was then I noticed something I should have seen right away. There was no beam. Headlights always cast a cone of light across the pavement, but they didn't touch the road at all. The 2 points floated in the dark, disconnected from everything, like tiny suns that didn't belong in this world. A shiver crawled up my spine. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, but my pulse thudded in my ears. My hands felt clammy on the wheel. The air in the cab felt heavier than before. Minutes passed, 5, maybe 10. The lights never wavered. They didn't bounce with the motion of a vehicle, didn't flicker like lamps. They were steady, too steady. Then they began to sway. It was slow at first, almost like they were shifting side to side. Then the movement became irregular, unnatural. It was the way a handheld flashlight moves when someone walks with it, bobbing, tilting, swinging just slightly. I gripped the wheel tighter. My mouth went dry. If those weren't headlights, then what the hell were they? And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished. No fading, no gradual dimming. 1 second they were there, the next, blackness. I let out a shaky breath. My chest felt tight, my shoulders stiff. Maybe it had been a trick of my eyes, a reflection from something far off. I glanced in the mirror again. That's when I saw them. Figures, 4 of them, maybe 5, standing in the narrow strip of my taillight's glow at the edge of the asphalt. They weren't moving, but every instinct I had screamed that they were facing me. And then, as I sped past, their heads turned, not like a person turning to watch a vehicle go by. They turned too far, way too far, until their faces, if they had faces, were twisted almost entirely backwards. I didn't remember breathing for the next 30 seconds. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't look in the mirror again because I knew if I did, they might be closer. So I kept driving without looking at the rearview mirror, but it was like trying to ignore a noise in the middle of the night. The awareness of it only grew until it became unbearable. The silence was back, but now it had a different weight. It wasn't empty, it was full of something I couldn't see, but that seemed to be moving along with me. My eyes started to burn, begging to blink, but I didn't want to lose a single second of the road ahead. That's when the radio, which had been turned off since Tucson, switched on by itself. First came a deep, heavy static, as if the sound were coming from underwater. Then a rhythmic noise, slow and deliberate, breathing. I didn't move a muscle. The static stopped, and then a voice low, almost a whisper. "You are not alone." My stomach turned. I looked at the radio's buttons. The frequency was spinning on its own, moving back and forth, as if something was searching for the right channel to speak to me. Suddenly, the temperature inside the cab plummeted. The suffocating desert heat vanished, replaced by a damp cold that clung to my skin and made the air too heavy to breathe. That's when I felt it. I didn't see the door open. I didn't hear the weight of someone sitting on the seat, but something was inside the truck. In the side window, my peripheral vision caught a reflection, and instinctively, I turned my head. There was a face pressed against mine, pale, almost translucent, with eyes black as pits, too deep to measure. and a smile far too wide, stretching nearly to its ears. I didn't scream, not because I was brave, but because the air simply wouldn't leave my lungs. I kept my eyes locked on the road, but from the corner of my vision, I saw that thing move, slowly, crawling toward the back of the cab, disappearing into the darkness where I kept my tools and supplies, and even without seeing it, I could hear it, a low, constant scraping, like nails dragging across metal. The radio hissed again, and the same voice whispered, "It's closer than you think." I knew it, that thing was there in the dark, less than 2 meters behind me. Every second felt like a minute. The scraping against the metal grew slower, heavier, as if whatever it was wanted me to hear every detail, drawing out the moment. I couldn't look back. Part of me wanted to confirm it, to end the doubt. The other part, the part that still wanted to survive, knew that if I looked, I would never be the same again. The temperature inside the cab kept dropping. With every breath, small clouds of white vapor escaped my mouth. I could feel the cold seeping into my back, like invisible fingers pressing into my spine. Then, the radio hissed again. This time, it wasn't a whisper, it was laughter. Low, hoarse, grating. But inside my head, suddenly, something touched my shoulder. A light touch, almost gentle, but enough to freeze my entire body. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Too fast to be human, too slow to be just a flicker. The rearview mirror trembled with the truck's vibrations, and for an instant, I saw it. I shouldn't have seen it. The thing was crouched on the back seat, its long hands gripping the headrest. Its face, or what should have been a face, had no fixed features. It was shifting, reshaping itself every second, trying to look like something I might recognize. And the worst part was that it was almost succeeding. That enormous mouth opened, but there were no teeth, only a deep black void that seemed to swallow what little light remained in the cab. It was then that the lights ahead of me failed. The headlights flickered twice and went out completely, plunging everything into absolute darkness. I was no longer alone on the road. I was inside something else. The darkness was absolute. I didn't know if I was still on the road or if I had somehow drifted off it without realizing. The sound of the engine continued, but it felt distant, muffled, as if I were hearing it from underwater. The radio, now silent, showed only the faint glow of digital numbers blinking at random. Minutes or hours might have passed. I couldn't be sure. Slowly, a glow returned ahead of the truck, but it wasn't my headlights. It was something much weaker, pulsing, coming from somewhere in the middle of the road, and as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a single light, but 4. They were eyes, huge, milky eyes, fixed on me. They didn't blink, they didn't move, they just watched motionless as I passed them, feeling the cold air seep into the cab like an invisible hand. When I finally saw the lights of the next gas station, I took my first deep breath in what felt like forever. I pulled over sharply, stepped out of the truck, and walked into the convenience store on shaky legs. Inside, a young clerk looked at me as if I were a ghost. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked, unhesitant. I just shook my head. Hours later, with daylight breaking, I decided to inspect the back of the cab. Between the toolboxes and the crumpled mattress, there was something that hadn't been there before. 4 deep gouges in the metal, as if long, sharp nails had scratched almost clean through the structure. I have never taken that stretch of I-8 after midnight again. And if any trucker asks me why, I only say, the desert is never empty. It was the end of a long delivery. I had already spent days on the road, and all I wanted was to reach El Paso before sunrise. The stretch I was about to take was known for being silent, a piece of US 70 surrounded by hills and dry brush, where you rarely saw another car after midnight. The night was dense, heavy, with a fog that seemed alive. It wasn't the usual fog that spread slowly. This one moved in waves, as if it were breathing along with the road. My headlights cut through that white shroud, revealing the center line for a few seconds, only for it to be swallowed up again. Inside the cab, The only sounds were the growl of the engine and the monotonous ticking of a pendulum I kept hanging on the dashboard. I always carried it, more out of superstition than aesthetics. The road unrolled beneath the wheels like an endless ribbon. For a while, I began to relax. That's when I noticed something strange. The internal temperature gauge showed a sudden drop. Out of nowhere, the air turned icy cold. So cold I had to rub my hands together to fight the numbness. The strange thing was, outside, the thermometer read 70 degrees Fahrenheit, typical for that time of year in New Mexico. I kept driving, but my eyes began to catch something on the side of the road. A shape, always distant, always at the very edge of the headlights. It could have been a tree, but there were no trees along that stretch. It could have been an animal, but it was far too still. As I drew closer, the shape began to take form. Tall, slender, dressed in white. It stood motionless, as if waiting for something or someone. My foot hesitated on the accelerator, and for a second I swear I saw the figure's chin move, as if it were murmuring something the fog carried away before it could reach me. I should have pressed on and sped past, but I didn't. The figure didn't move. I slowed down, but not by choice. It felt as though the truck was getting heavier with every meter. The fog closed in even tighter, as if it were trying to hide that woman from me, or keep me from escaping her. When I was about 50 meters away, she began to walk. Slow, rhythmic steps, almost floating along the shoulder of the road. Her white dress moved as if it were underwater, even though there was no wind. My headlights didn't seem strong enough to reveal her face, but I could see the pale skin of her hands, thin, long, and for some reason she was holding something, a small dark object clenched in her palm. When I got close enough to see her better, she raised her arm and made a clear gesture, asking for a ride. The movement was slow, almost hesitant, but enough for me to understand. By instinct, or stupidity, I pulled the truck onto the shoulder. The gear shift clunked as I downshifted, and the sound of the engine echoed in the emptiness, as if the road had been waiting for this moment. She approached from the side, walking without hurry. The sound of her steps didn't match what I saw. Every time her foot touched the ground, it was as if there were no weight at all. No stones or twigs shifted beneath her. When she reached the passenger door, she just stood there. She didn't knock, she didn't call. She simply stared at me through the glass, her head tilted slightly, as if trying to figure out what I was. Then I noticed the detail that froze my blood. The fog didn't wrap around her like it did everything else. It seemed to repel the white shroud, creating a clear, still space around her, as if the world had forgotten to breathe there. Without knowing why, my hand went to the door lock, and I opened it. When I pulled the handle, I felt a sharp, metallic click that echoed inside the cab louder than it should have. The door opened slowly, creaking in a way it had never creaked before, as if it were protesting my decision. She didn't get in right away. She stood there, one foot on the asphalt and the other hovering over the truck's step. Her eyes, now visible, had no shine. They weren't blind, but they looked like they were made of glass, reflecting only a pale ghost of the headlights. "Come in," I murmured, not knowing why my voice came out so low, almost trembling. She climbed in. The movement was wrong. She didn't stumble, didn't brace herself, didn't make any effort. It was as if her body had slid into the seat, without weight, without friction, without even displacing the air. When she sat down, the silence inside the cab changed. It was no longer the silence of the road. It was a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to swallow sounds. Even the engine felt farther away, muffled, as if we were sealed inside an invisible cocoon. I glanced at her, trying to be discreet. Her dress was far too clean for someone who had been walking along a dusty roadside. Her skin, pale as paper, looked cold just to look at. She held that small object in her right hand, and now I could see it more clearly. It looked like an old medallion, made of tarnished silver, with something engraved on it that I couldn't quite make out. "Where are you going?" I asked. She slowly turned her head until those glass eyes were fixed on mine. We stayed like that for a few seconds. Seconds that felt like minutes until she replied, "It doesn't matter where." The way she said it made my stomach twist. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. It was as if the voice hadn't just come from her mouth, but had echoed inside my head, vibrating through my bones. I kept driving, but I noticed something strange. The fog outside seemed to move away from the truck. It was as if the road ahead had become a clear corridor, while the mist piled up on either side, forming tall, dense white walls, as if they were guiding us somewhere. I tried to hide my unease by fiddling with the radio, but all I got was static. That's when I realized the pendulum on the dashboard, the one that always swayed with the truck's motion, was completely still. I looked at her again. She wasn't blinking. The medallion in her hand trembled slightly, as if something inside it wanted to get out. And then she smiled. It was a slow smile, starting without showing teeth, but it kept widening and widening until it was far too large to be human. For a few minutes, I just drove. The steady sound of the engine felt like the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. But something was wrong. Every second beside her seemed to stretch, as if time itself was being pulled by invisible strings. I didn't look at her directly, but I could feel her there. The air on the passenger side was colder, almost icy, as if a window had been left open, though they were all shut, and that cold didn't mix with the rest of the air in the cab. It stayed concentrated around her, as if it were part of her body. At one moment, without realizing, my eyes drifted from the road. She was looking at me, and now the smile hadn't faded. It was wider, more tense, as if it were about to split in two. Then she spoke. "You know who I am?" The voice didn't come only from her mouth. It spread through the cab, as if it were being spoken from every corner at once. The sound reverberated inside my head, creating a pressure in my ears that made me want to scream. I tried to answer, but my voice wouldn't come out. That's when I noticed my hands were stiff on the wheel, as if they had frozen in place. The pendulum on the dashboard was still motionless. The road began to change. The white lines on the asphalt, once straight, started to distort, winding and twisting as if they were alive. The headlights lit a fog that seemed to close the corridor behind us, trapping me there with her. When I looked forward, I saw the medallion in her hand begin to open on its own. The lid rotated slowly, without her moving a single finger. From inside, a faint, pulsing light escaped, casting strange shadows through the cab. I caught the scent of wet earth and something else. A sweet, almost sickly odor, like flowers that had already begun to rot. She then tilted her head toward me, and the smile vanished. In its place, her mouth opened slowly, far beyond what was natural, dark, deep, and from inside, I heard footsteps. It wasn't possible, but I could clearly hear the sound of feet walking, coming from within her. That's when the engine failed. The truck lost power, and the road was swallowed in darkness. The truck stopped. It wasn't a sudden jolt, nor a hard brake. It was as if the force moving it had simply vanished, leaving only the muffled sound of the wind trying to push through the fog. I was frozen, my hands glued to the steering wheel. Slowly, I realized I could no longer feel my feet. It was as if the cold had climbed up my body, erasing all sensation. I looked to the side. The passenger seat was empty. The medallion lay open on the seat, its lid slowly spinning, as if moved by an invisible draft. From within, the light pulsed with a strange rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The fog outside began to thin, revealing the empty road. But for a moment, I had the impression that I was no longer on US 70. The landscape was bounced wrong. The hills around me seemed taller, the shadows denser, as if the night itself had gained weight. Without knowing why, I picked up the medallion. The instant I touched it, a whisper filled my head. "You know who I am, and I know where you're going." I threw the medallion out the window, and it vanished into the fog. I started the truck, and the engine responded as if nothing had happened. I drove until sunrise without stopping, and when I finally parked in a truck stop lot, I promised myself I would never take that stretch again. But that night, as I tried to sleep in the cab bunk, I woke up to a sound coming from the passenger seat. It was the sound of something dropping onto the upholstery. When I looked, the medallion was there, closed, waiting. I've always said that driving in Alaska is like piloting a ship across a white ocean. The Dalton Highway isn't a road, it's a scar, a rough line slicing through tundra, mountains and valleys buried in snow, connecting Fairbanks to nothing, or to what feels like the end of the world way up in Deadhorse. I left around midnight, when the northern sky decides that night is a relative concept. A deep blue band cut across the horizon, and the rest was endless dusk. The temperature hovered around 22 degrees, and that isn't cold, it's silence that bites. The air enters your lungs like thin glass. Skin cracks beneath the glove, everything creaks, even thought. My truck growled with that low tone of a tired animal, the tires clawing chains into ancient ice. The cab smelled of diesel, rubber, and that sweet metallic scent that only appears when frost takes over. On the dashboard, amber gauges glowed, oil pressure steady, RPMs calm, fuel enough, and a digital clock that seemed to freeze for a few seconds before jumping to the next number, as if time itself was slipping. The road ahead was a corridor of white, textured by crosswinds. Old tire tracks vanished under wind-blown powder. I kept both hands on the wheel, back stiff, chin buried in my hood, breathing through a mask so my throat wouldn't burn. Even so, the cold found cracks. The cold always finds cracks. There were no other headlights, no houses, only emergency marker poles every eternity or so, and a heavy sky still undecided between snow and darkness. The VHF radio rested at my side, essential for this route, but I left it silent. Sometimes static cuts deeper than it comforts. Sometimes static brings things. The side window began to frost over from the inside, a delicate lace of ice creeping toward the mirror like transparent fingers testing their reach. I rubbed it with the back of my glove. The frost didn't yield. Across the panel, the heater wheezed out a warm breath that died before reaching my boots. I could feel the laces stiffening inside them. You learn to listen to the Dalton through the ground. The truck speaks. A dry snap announces a seam of ice. A metallic yawn warns of a bridge. A short cry means the trailer slipped 2 centimeters beyond comfort. But that night there was another sound, almost imperceptible, threading itself between the usual noises. A vibration that wasn't engine, wind, or chassis. It started behind me, in the sleeper compartment, like someone pressing the mattress with a palm and letting go, repeating patient, testing the elasticity of my fear. I ignored it. Looked at the horizon, where a low wall of fog advanced like a silent army. Fine snow began to dance in the headlights, first timid, then insistent. Microscopic spirals hypnotizing the brain. I downshifted. The truck sighed in relief, a sound only I could hear. The first long curve appeared, and with it a crosswind that pushed the trailer as if it were paper. I corrected the wheel. The rear bit into ice, skated, returned. In that sway, the other sound moved, from the mattress to the tool cabinet. A faint clink, a scrape of metal, something bracing itself from within. I took a deep breath, felt the vapor hit my mask, and return damp against my face. The pendant hanging from the mirror, an amulet I picked up years ago at a Fairbanks truck stop, stopped. It should have been swaying, it wasn't. Visibility dropped all at once, like a curtain pulled shut. The Dalton became a white tunnel. It wasn't a blizzard yet. Worse, it was the pre-blizzard, when the world seems to hold its breath and listen. The flakes held just enough light that I was driving inside a milky sphere, and everything beyond. Nothing, the kind of nothing that listens. It was in that nothing that I saw the first footprints. They shouldn't have been there. Not in the center of the road, not on fresh snow, not in that kind of cold that turns steps into rigid sculptures. But there they were, oval, deep, evenly spaced, and large, much larger than my boots. They came from nowhere, crossed the beam of my headlights, and vanished into the white on the left as if someone had crossed the Dalton minutes earlier, or as if they were still crossing. I pressed the radio without thinking and turned the dial. The channel opened with a sigh and then voices, not words, chewed syllables, clicks, a song with no melody, maybe just the wind. I turned the volume down. The noise stayed at the same level. As if it wasn't coming from the device, I should have stopped. I've always said, if in doubt, stop. But I kept going. I kept going because it was night, because it was ice, because in this part of the world you learn stopping can be deadlier than moving forward. I kept going because part of me wanted to see so I could unsee later. The worst part, another set of footprints appeared, parallel to the first, both converging a few yards ahead. They were deep enough to cast shadows, shadows in the white night. Something in their geometry reminded me of a gate, not a visible one, but the suggestion that I was crossing boundaries the Dalton doesn't carry on any map. The ground thudded under the front axle. A muffled crack, like old wood breaking in the ice, echoed beneath my feet. I tapped the brake. The trailer pulled back a hair. In the side mirror, the light reflected an opaque sheen on the snow. Not a clean reflection, but a wet one, as if there were water where there shouldn't be. And beneath that liquid film, for a fraction of a second, I swear I saw a headlight watching me. Not my beam bouncing back, an eye huge still, buried in the ice, fixed on my cab. I blinked. The sheen turned to ordinary white, ice and wind. The mind in Alaska likes to play. But the vibration behind me started again, now rhythmic, in time with the click-click of the odometer. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, as if something were learning to walk at my pace. In there, warming itself with my heater, breathing my air. I spoke aloud, an old habit to keep ghosts away and my brain honest. It's just ice, it's wood, it's wind playing tricks with the radio. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the cab's lining. My breath froze in the air and fell like dust. A mile marker appeared on the right, half buried in snow. At its top, someone had tied a scrap of red cloth, stiffened, flapping lazily in the wind. I'd never seen that scrap there before. In Alaska, you mark things when something happens. A warning, a reminder, a memorial. The panel flickered. A light that wasn't an electrical fault, wasn't an oil alert, wasn't anything I knew. A shapeless icon born of the cold glowed for a second and died. The digital clock froze at 1:13. 15 seconds later, it was still 1:13. Then, without transition, it jumped to 1:14 as if nothing had happened. I felt the weight of the cab change. It's an instinct you develop. You know when a truck is heavier without looking at the gauge, not from shifting cargo, but from presence. Like someone sitting on the bunk and testing the springs with their heel. I knew I wasn't alone. That's when I made my first mistake that night. I turned on the cabin light. The amber bulb spilled its warm color over the cab's interior, revealing golden dust swirling in the air. The passenger seat was empty. The bunk, neatly made, showed a shallow, long, wet mark, like when you leave a coat to melt snow into the fabric. The spare boots beside it, I always keep a pair, were turned to face forward. I never leave them facing forward. I turned the light off. The white world outside, the milky sphere of my headlights, the footprints that came and went like mistranslated symbols, all of it reclaimed my vision. And then I realized that for several minutes, I'd been driving without hearing the sound of my tires. No crunch of ice, no grains blown beneath the chains, as if the road had become a soft surface, as if I were gliding over skin. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles hurt, counted my breaths, 4 in, 4 out. The radio hissed again, deeper now, like someone exhaling directly into my ear. 3 syllables emerged from the scratch of static. They weren't words, but my brain, hungry for meaning, gave them form. Turn back. I didn't turn. Not then. The fog wall ahead split open, and I saw what I thought didn't exist on the Dalton light. Not human light. A fixed, milky glow without a source. spread across a clearing of ice drawing closer. It was as if the sky had descended and touched the ground, turning the air to glass. I downshifted again. The truck, grateful, shivered in relief. The light grew in the windshield, and with it, the absurd, painful certainty that I had been here before. I recognized that clearing, that curve, that mile marker with a scrap that shouldn't be there. And yet, it was my first time. Maybe I'd looped back. Maybe time had passed twice through the same hole. Maybe the Dalton, that night, was bigger on the inside than the outside. The wind stopped, not slowed, stopped. Silence pressed its forehead to the glass. The glow ahead pulsed slightly, as if breathing. And the instant my headlights reached the edge of the clearing, something crossed the road, too fast for my mind to assemble the puzzle, slow enough for my memory to carry forever. Tall, far too tall, upright beyond animal, heavy enough to sink deep into snow, and with a head turned toward me. I didn't see a face. I saw the certainty of being seen. The wheel trembled. My stomach turned to ice, and for the first time that night, I considered stopping the truck in the middle of the Dalton, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the white, and shutting it all off. I didn't stop. I pressed the accelerator slightly. The creature, or whatever it was, vanished into the wall of light like someone slipping through a curtain. The footprints reappeared, now on top of my tire tracks, as if it had decided to walk where I had already been. A trick of presence. A reminder that Alaska knows how to repeat steps. When the clock hand decided to move again, marking 1:19, I understood that night's chapter had only turned the first page. The Dalton hadn't accepted me. It had swallowed me. And I still had hundreds of miles of white ahead. I kept driving as if the steering wheel were my lifeline. My eyes were fixed on the white corridor carved by the headlights, but my mind was still stuck on whatever had crossed the road. It wasn't just the size or posture, it was the feeling that it knew I would see it. The radio, which had been silent since the first noise, came to life with a sharp crack. Static entered like a damp breath, followed by a deep, continuous sound, like a sustained note played by some non-existent instrument. It wasn't interference from another truck. It was deeper, more organic, as if the ice itself were trying to speak. I turned the volume knob to 0. The sound continued. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the air around me. That's when I noticed something else. There was no more wind, no sway in the mirror, no gusts hitting the windshield. The snow, which had been dancing in the light, now fell in straight lines as if the world had turned off its breath. I passed the next mile marker, and suddenly the dashboard went dark. There was no engine failure, no loss of power, just the interior lights dying all at once. The road ahead was lit only by the headlights, and the rest of the world sank into solid black. My hand itched to turn on the cabin light again, but something inside me screamed not to. I kept my eyes on the road, breathing slowly, trying not to hear the sound now coming from behind me. It wasn't vibration anymore, nor rhythmic thuds. It was dragging, like fabric being pulled across the metallic floor of the cab. I glanced at the interior mirror and saw only shadow, but it wasn't ordinary shadow. It was thick, like compressed black smoke in a corner. And for a split second, I thought I saw two pale reflections inside it. Not headlights, not lights. Eyes. I pressed the accelerator, feeling the engine respond with strength. But the Dalton isn't a road you can rush without a price. The ice answered with a light slide of the trailer, a dry warning that speeding wouldn't help. That's when the radio came back to life. But this time, not with static, with a voice. Low, hoarse, irregular, as if whispered through broken teeth. "You've been here before." My whole body shivered, not because of the words, but because it was my voice, recorded, distorted, but unmistakably mine. I swallowed hard and kept the truck in the center of the lane, even as the fog thickened again. The dashboard flickered on its own, as if trying to restart but failed. The only thing I saw light up again was the digital clock. It read 1:13 again. When the clock read 1:13 for the third time, I realized the Dalton was no longer taking me forward. It was making me drive in circles. It wasn't a feeling, it was a fact. I recognized the mile marker with the stiff red scrap, swaying in the same lazy rhythm as before. I even recognized the pattern of cracks in the ice on the right side, like a fossilized spiderweb. I passed the spot more slowly this time, trying to prove to myself it was a coincidence. It wasn't. At the exact point where, minutes earlier, I had seen those massive footprints crossing the road. There they were again. Same depth, same direction. Not a single new flake covering them. A tingling crawled up my neck. I glanced in the mirror and for the first time saw movement inside the thick shadow on the bunk. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't fast. It was the slow, steady sway of someone breathing while watching. The radio came alive again, spitting out my voice once more. But now it wasn't a full sentence, it was laughter. Short, humorless laughter, as if mocking my stubbornness to keep going. I pressed the accelerator, determined to break the cycle. The engine responded, and the road began to slide faster beneath me, until I noticed something impossible. The trees and hills to my left and right weren't moving. The landscape was fixed, frozen in the same place, as if the truck were running on a treadmill. I tried looking at the horizon, but it too seemed far away, retreating with every meter I advanced. The speedometer needle trembled, and the tires made no sound at all. It was like driving in a vacuum. A faint light appeared on the roadside ahead. I thought it might be another trucker pulled over, but as I got closer, I saw it was an emergency post with a broken beacon. The light was coming from inside it, pulsing like a heartbeat. At the base of the post, half buried in snow, was another medallion, identical to mine. The air in the cab grew heavy. Without thinking, I looked at the passenger seat. It wasn't empty. The woman was sitting there. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't see her get in. But there she was, facing me, unblinking, her skin as pale as the snow, holding my medallion. The same one I knew was hanging from the mirror. The radio spoke again. It was no longer my voice, it was hers. "You've been here before." The clock's hand didn't move. And then, without warning, the road disappeared. The road vanished, as if it had been erased from a painting. There was no snow, no tire tracks, only a smooth, milky ground with no texture, reflecting my headlights like murky water. The horizon exploded with light, not a flashlight from a headlamp, but an entire wall of luminosity advancing, with no visible source, no point of origin. It was as if the air itself had decided to glow, pulsing with a slow, deep rhythm, almost breathing. The engine didn't fail, but its sound became muffled, as if someone had covered the cab in layers of snow. My ears popped. The pressure was rising, and each breath grew harder to take. The woman in the passenger seat remained still, holding the medallion, but now it was open, and a beam of light the same hue as the wall ahead was escaping from inside, casting strange shapes on the cab's ceiling, shapes that moved on their own, independent of the truck's motion. The radio crackled, and a voice, not mine, not hers, whispered something incomprehensible. It wasn't language. It was as if a set of sounds had been shaped to imitate words my mind couldn't recognize. The wall of light swallowed the road, and that's when it appeared. It emerged from within the glow, crossing it as though through a curtain. First, a pair of disproportionate legs, so long it took seconds before the torso came into view. Then, arms far too thin for the size of its body, hanging like strings from a puppet. The skin, if it was skin, had a grayish-blue tone, with fissures leaking the same glow as the wall. The head, upright and still, seemed featureless until it tilted slightly, revealing two deep, almost black eyes that reflected my headlights like oil on water. They didn't blink. They didn't need to blink. It began walking toward me, but it made no sound at all. Each step, however, left behind a trail of footprints that sank far too deep for the firmness of the ground. Footprints, identical to the ones I had seen before. The woman beside me finally moved. She turned her face toward me and, with a slow, unreadable smile, said softly, "Now you will understand." The medallion's light flared brighter, and the entire cab was consumed by the same glow. I could no longer see the dashboard, the steering wheel, nothing except it, now so close that its eyes filled my entire vision. And then, silence, a heavy silence, as if the world had been switched off. When the light consumed everything, I lost any sense of where I was. There was no cab, no road, no sky, only a dense, tangible white that seemed to fill my lungs and replace the air. There was no sound, not the engine, not the wind, not even the blood in my ears. Only a heavy silence, as if the world were trapped underwater. The figure stood in front of me, motionless, watching. Its black eyes seemed to absorb all the glow around them, like two holes in the fabric of reality. I couldn't look away, and with each passing second, I felt as though it was growing, as if the distance between us was shrinking without it moving at all. The woman was no longer beside me, but the medallion was now in my hand. I didn't remember taking it. It was closed, cold and pulsing like a slow heart. Then the ground beneath my feet, or whatever it was, began to dissolve. It didn't crack. It simply melted away, revealing an absolute void below, so black it seemed to pull the light inward. The being tilted its head to the side as if analyzing my reaction, and took a single step. In that instant, the light went out. Sound returned like an explosion. The engine roaring, the wind slamming, the radio hissing. I was back on the Dalton highway. The dashboard was working. The clock read 1:13. I looked into the mirror. Nothing on the road behind me, only snow. But for a moment, I swear I saw my own silhouette walking down the middle of the lane, heading in the opposite direction. I kept driving until sunrise, without stopping, without looking to the sides. When I reached Dead Horse, I parked the truck, locked the cab, and swore never to take that road again. But that night, at the motel, I woke up to a noise on the nightstand. The medallion was there, closed, waiting. I was only a few hours from crossing the border into Canada when the road decided to change its mood. It started like any other night on the road. Clear sky, cold air, and that deep silence you only find in remote areas. The stretch I was on had no streetlights, only my headlights cutting through the black asphalt and the pale shimmer of the stars. There was something comforting about the solitude of Highway 37. The dense forests flanking the road looked like dark walls, guarding secrets I had no interest in knowing. But shortly after midnight, I noticed the world around me was becoming different. First, it was the sound. The engine's rumble was normal, but the sound of the tires against the asphalt disappeared. There was no transition. It just vanished. The truck felt like it was gliding, as if on glass. Then came the smell, a metallic, cold, faintly sweet scent, like fresh blood exposed to icy air. It entered the cab suddenly, far too strong to be something just on the roadside. I looked in the mirror and saw fog beginning to form behind me. Not the kind that drifts faintly across the horizon. It was a thick, dense band, as if it were following me, always keeping the same distance. The dashboard flickered, but didn't fail. A strange sequence of numbers appeared briefly on the display. It wasn't the time, it wasn't mileage, maybe coordinates, but before I could write them down, they vanished. When the road curved slightly, something caught my attention. On the shoulder, there was an isolated phone booth. Impossible. I knew that stretch well, and there was nothing there for more than 30 miles. The booth was lit, and inside it, a figure stood with its back to me, holding the receiver to its ear. It didn't move. It didn't seem to be speaking. As I passed slowly, the booth's glass reflected my headlights, and I realized the reflection wasn't my truck. It was another one, an old, rusted model with yellowed headlights, and in the driver's seat, a man staring directly at me. Even through the reflection, I didn't look back, but the metallic smell grew stronger. The road narrowed after a few miles, and the trees seemed to lean in closer, as if they wanted to seal off the path. The fog behind me was still the same, a dense wall matching my speed, patient, neither closing in nor falling back. That's when I saw something even stranger, a lamppost in the middle of the forest. Not on the roadside hut, but inside, about 20 yards from the shoulder, wedged between the trees as if it belonged to some ghost street. It was lit, casting a weak, yellowish glow that didn't illuminate anything around it, as if the light existed only for itself. I slowed down and pulled onto the shoulder. From where I was, I could see something hanging from the pole, a dark object, swaying slowly, suspended by a cord. I grabbed the binoculars I always keep on the dashboard and adjusted the focus. It was a telephone, an old rotary phone, hanging by its coiled cord, spinning slowly in the icy wind. As I watched, the lampost's light flickered for a second, and in that moment, the fog behind me seemed to take a step forward, not physically, but visually. Suddenly, it looked closer. I pressed the accelerator and kept going, my heart pounding. But at every curve, I noticed there was another lamppost farther ahead, always set back from the road, always with the same dim light and something hanging from it. Sometimes it was a telephone. Sometimes it looked like a piece of clothing. Once, I'm certain it was a child's shoe. The dashboard flickered again, and the strange numbers returned. But this time, they didn't vanish so quickly. Somehow I knew they were coordinates, and logically those coordinates weren't leading me to Canada. The third post appeared on a sharp curve, almost touching the road. The weak light flickered, and the air felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in just that spot. This time, the object hanging from it wasn't swaying. It was a red rotary phone, its coiled cord stretched to the limit, as if someone had yanked it hard and left it suspended in mid-air. The receiver faced the road, as if it was staring at me. I can't explain why I stopped. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe some strange need to confirm that it was real. I stepped out of the truck, and the sound of the engine became distant, muffled, as if it were coming from underwater. The air around the post felt dense. My footsteps on the gravel seemed to echo too much, as if the space here was bigger on the inside than on the outside. When I touched the phone, I felt a faint, cold shock, as if the device had just been pulled out of ice. The rotary dial was stuck, and the cord vibrated slightly, as if something on the other end of the line was breathing. Then I heard it, a low, hoarse voice that didn't seem to be speaking to me, but about me. He's here. I pulled the phone away from my ear, but the voice continued, even without contact. I looked at the road. The wall of fog was now in the middle of the lane, just a few yards from my truck, standing still as if waiting. The voice on the phone changed tone, becoming clearer, almost cheerful. It's time. That's when I noticed a detail that froze my blood. The reflection in the phone's glass didn't show my face. It showed the man from the rusted truck, and he was smiling. I walked quickly back to the cab, trying to ignore the fact that the phone was still whispering behind me, even though it wasn't connected to anything. I shut the door and turned the ignition. The engine responded, but the sound was quieter, muffled, as if coming from far away. I looked in the rear-view mirror. The wall of fog was no longer still. It was moving, slow but constant, swallowing the road behind me. I shifted into gear and pressed the accelerator, trying to leave it behind. But then I saw something emerging from within the fog. Headlights, yellowed, flickering, struggling to stay lit. As they drew closer, the shape revealed itself. It was the same old rusted truck I had seen in the phone booth's reflection. Its paint was peeling, the body scarred with deep rust, and the front bore a massive dent, as if it had hit something, or someone. The strangest thing was that the vehicle made no sound at all. No engine roar, no tire noise on the pavement. And yet, it stayed perfectly aligned with me only a few yards behind. At every turn, it copied my movements with surgical precision. I tried accelerating as much as I could, but the speedometer didn't seem to react, as if the road itself was holding me in place. When I glanced at the interior rear-view mirror again, I saw someone in the rusted truck's driver's seat. A man, grayish skin, a fixed stare, and a slow smile that didn't belong to anything alive. He didn't blink. And the moment our eyes met through the mirror, my truck's radio turned on by itself. His voice came through clearly, as if he were sitting right beside me. The way back doesn't exist. That's when I noticed the road ahead was starting to change. The trees were disappearing, replaced by rows of lampposts, and every single one had something hanging from it. The road seemed endless. The lampposts repeated like the marks of a carousel, always with something hanging from them, always the same distance apart. It was impossible to tell if I was moving forward or if the world was sliding beneath me. The rusted truck remained behind me, constant like my shadow. Its weak headlights trembled in the mirror, but the distance never grew nor shrank. The radio crackled again, and the man's voice spoke, softer this time. "You've been here before." I looked at the dashboard. The clock read EU0, EU0. It didn't blink. It didn't change. The road ahead began to brighten, as if powerful lights were coming from some distant point. My heart sped up. Maybe it was the border, maybe, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a checkpoint. It was another phone booth, identical to the first, lit from within. And inside, with his back turned, a trucker was holding the receiver. I pulled over, hypnotized. The man inside the booth slowly turned his face toward me. It was me. The reflection in the booth's glass showed the rusted truck parked right behind mine, and its driver, the gray-skinned man, was sitting in the passenger seat of my cab. I turned my head slowly. The seat was empty, but the silver medallion was there, closed, waiting. The radio spoke one last time. "Welcome back." And then everything went dark. The 4 stories you've heard aren't just coincidences. They are fragments of something much bigger, much older, something that seems to inhabit the roads when night covers everything and solitude becomes too heavy to ignore. It doesn't matter if it's in the desert, in Alaska, on a forgotten road in the middle of nowhere, or heading to Canada. There is always a point where reality begins to give way to what should not exist. A point where the truck's headlights illuminate more than just asphalt. They illuminate what waits, patiently to be seen. Maybe you believe these are just trucker legends. Maybe you think it's exaggeration, invention, or the kind of story told to chase away the boredom of a long trip. But what if it's not? What if, right now, as you hear my voice, a wall of fog is forming behind a truck on the highway? What if, in the glass reflection, it's not you staring back? If there's one thing I've learned from hearing these accounts, it's that the road never forgets. It keeps every story, every disappearance, every lost glance into the darkness, and sometimes it gives those stories back at the moment you least expect it. So next time you're driving alone at night and notice something strange in your rearview mirror, don't slow down, don't look again, and most importantly, don't answer the phone. If you enjoyed this story, click the link below and uncover even deeper horrors in our exclusive ebook.